Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Today we are going to learn about the cerebrospinal fluid. Cerebrospinal fluid is a colorless fluid which exists inside and all around the brain and spinal cord. This is abbreviated as CSF. In this lecture, we will learn about where the cerebrospinal fluid formation occur, what is the pathway of cerebrospinal fluid, and where the cerebrospinal fluid is absorbed. To know about the cerebrospinal fluid in detail, we are going to the first diagram. This is the first diagram. In this diagram, we can see that this is the brain and this is the spinal cord. This brain and this spinal cord is enclosed by a bony structure, the cranium and the vertebral column. The cranium encloses the brain and the vertebral column encloses the spinal cord. Similarly, in between the cranium and vertebral column, there are three meningeal layers. There are three meninges, the layers which encloses the brain and spinal cord. Those are called meninges. The first layer, which encloses the brain and spinal cord, which is in direct contact with the brain and spinal cord, is called pia mater. This is this blue color layer which encloses the brain and spinal cord. This is called pia mater. This pia mater encloses the brain and spinal cord, and this is in direct contact with the brain and spinal cord. I'm going to write it. The pia mater. Pia means soft and mater means mother. Pia means soft and slender, and matter mean mother. This is made up of very soft nature material. That is why this is called pia mater, and this is very soft because it's in direct contact with the brain and spinal cord. In one of the portion of this pia mater below the spinal cord, the spinal cord exists up to this portion, and below the spinal cord, this area or this part of the pia mater is extended towards the coccyx. This is 20 centimeter in length, and this is called phylum terminale. This is the part of the pia mater. This is called phylum terminale. Phylum terminale. Phylum terminale is the part of the pia mater which is extended towards the coccyx. This is having two parts which we will learn in the next slide. So this is the phylum terminale which is extended towards the coccyx, or the last part of the vertebral column. Because the spinal cord is not extended toward the last part of the vertebral column, so this portion is extended toward the last portion of the vertebral column. This is called phylum terminale. This is the second layer of the meninges, or this is the second layer which encloses the brain and spinal cord, and this layer is called arachnoid matter. This is called what? This is called arachnoid matter. Arachnoid matter. Arachnoid means spider-like, or the web-like, the spider-like, or the spider web-like, and matter mean mother. Arachnoid means spider-like or spider web-like, and matter means mother. So this the appearance of this layer is just like the spider web. That's why this is called arachnoid matter. And in between the arachnoid matter and pia mater, there is space. There is big space in between the arachnoid matter and pia mater. This space is called what? This is called subarachnoid space. This is called subarachnoid space. Subarachnoid space. Subarachnoid space is very much important because in the subarachnoid space 150 ml of the cerebrospinal fluid exists. The cerebrospinal fluid exists in this gap, in this space. The cerebrospinal fluid exists in the subarachnoid space. This is the subarachnoid space which exists in between the pia mater and the subarachnoid spaces in between the pia mater and arachnoid matter. So in between the pia mater and arachnoid matter, there is a space that is called subarachnoid space, and in this space the cerebrospinal fluid exists. There is big space over here. You can see. I'm going to uh, I'm going to discuss this point in detail in the next slide. And now the third layer, which is very tough layer, this is called this green color layer, which encloses the brain and spinal cord. And this is the third layer, or the third meninges of the brain. This is called dura mater. Dura mater. Dura means tough. Dura is derived from the word tough, Latin word which means tough. So this is the very tough layer which encloses the brain and spinal cord, and this layer is called dura mater. This is the third layer. After the dura mater, there is the bony structure. Here is the vertebral column, and here is the cranium. Now we can see over here that the dura mater and the dura mater and the arachnoid mater is extended toward this side, while the spinal cord is extended only up to this point. Where is this point located? In the next slide we will see it in detail. Now we can see it that over here that the spinal cord is extended up to the L1 portion of the vertebral column. Up to the L1 portion of the vertebral column, the spinal cord is extended. The spinal cord is extended up to the L1 portion of the vertebral column. So this part of the spinal cord is called conus medullaris. This part of the spinal cord is called conus medullaris. What is this part called? It is called conus medullaris. Conus medullaris is the last part of the spinal cord which exists in the L2 portion of the L1 portion of the vertebral column inside the meninges, where the spinal cord is converted to the at this portion the spinal cord is converted into the cauda equina, which I have discussed in the previous lecture. The cauda equina start from this portion. I have not made the cauda equina over here, but the nerve fiber which arises from this portion is called cauda equina. The cauda equina start from this portion, medullaris, conus medullaris. The cauda equina starts from this portion. The cauda equina start from conus medullaris, and conus medullaris is the last part of the spinal cord. This is the last part of the spinal cord which exists in the L1 portion of the spinal cord. Below the L1 portion, the cauda equina start. Below the L1 portion, the cauda equina starts. Okay, and also below the L1 portion, the this tail-like projection of the pia mater, that is called phylum terminale, start. This part of the phylum terminale, which is inside the this dural sac, this is called dural sac. This is called what? This is called dural sac. I am going to write each and every terminology over here. Dural sac. Dural sac is this is a sac-like structure which is made by the dura mater and the arachnoid mater below the conus medullaris, and this dural sac exists from L1 to the S2. Below the L1, the dural sac start, and up to S2, sacral 2, the S2 portion of the vertebral column. This sac, or this dural sac exists. This dural sac exists in between the L1 and S2. In between the L1 and S2, the dural sac exists, and large quantity of the cerebrospinal fluid exists over here. And this is a very ideal site for the injection into the cerebrospinal fluid. If we want to inject something to the cerebrospinal fluid, we this is the very ideal site for the cerebrospinal fluid injection. um, that is, the injection can be applied or administered below the L1 and above the S2. So if we apply injection over here, we can easily get the cerebrospinal fluid, or we can easily inject something to the cerebrospinal fluid without any injury to the spinal cord. If there is any injury which occurs in the filum medullaris, final terminal, or the cara equina, then that is regenerated very easily. That is not a big deal. So and this is the portion. This is called uh, dural sac. Dural sac exists below the L1 up to the S2 of the vertebral column, and this is a sac-like structure which encloses the cerebrospinal fluid. This is a sac-like structure below the conus medullaris. Below the conus medullaris, the sac-like structure which encloses the cerebrospinal fluid. This is called what? This is called dural sac. So this dural sac is extended, or the extended part of the dura mater and the arachnoid mater, and this is the ideal site for the injection. In between the dural sac, you can see over here that the phylum terminale interna and the phylum terminale externa. There are two parts of the phylum terminale: the phylum terminale interna and the phylum terminale externa. The phylum terminale, the whole length of phylum terminale is 20 centimeter, and this 20 centimeter length goes up to the coccyx region, up to the coccyx region of the vertebral column. And what is the function of this phylum terminale? This is very important structure because this is connected with the coccygeal vertebrae. This is the last part of the phylum terminale is connected with the coccygeal vertebrae, and by the connection of this phylum terminale with the coccygeal vertebrae, it maintains the position of the spinal cord. It avoid the retraction of the spinal cord. It maintain the position and the direction of the spinal cord. It avoid the traction of the spinal cord, or the cranium, to avoid the traction of the cranium and spinal cord, and to avoid any movement or unwanted protrusion of the spinal cord and the brain. This phylum terminale maintain the position of the spinal cord and the brain, or the spinal cord. So this is very important structure, and this is connected with the coccygeal vertebrae in the last. Now coming toward the next slide. In this slide we can see that this is the brain, this is the boundary of the brain, and this is the boundary of the brain. Inside the brain there are four cavities. Four cavities are there. These are called lateral cavities. These cavities are actually called ventricle. These are called lateral ventricle. Four ventricles are there in the brain. These are the lateral ventricle. This is the third ventricle, and this is the fourth ventricle. I'm going to write in detail. There are four ventricles in the brain. The right ventricle, the right lateral ventricle, the left lateral ventricle, third ventricle, and the fourth ventricle. Four cavities are there inside the brain, and these cavities are the right ventricle, the left ventricle, the third ventricle, and the fourth ventricle. Four ventricles are there, just like the heart. And the heart also four ventricles exist. uh, but those ventricles are for pumping and these are not for pumping. Inside these ventricles, the formation of cerebrospinal fluid occur. Inside these ventricles, the formation of cerebrospinal fluid occur, and how the cerebrospinal fluid occur inside these ventricles we will learn in the next slide. But in these slides, we are going to discuss in detail. Over here, we can see that this is the longitudinal fissure of the brain. This is the longitudinal fissure of the brain, and below the longitudinal fissure of the brain, this area, there is a white matter over here that is called corpus callosum. Corpus callosum is there below the longitudinal fissure. The corpus callosum is there, and below the corpus callosum there is uh, there are two ventricles, the right ventricle and the lateral ventricle of the brain. Now in this slide we will learn about, in this slide, this is very important slide, you should focus on this slide very attentively. Over here, the third ventricle, this is the third ventricle and these are the lateral ventricle. So the lateral ventricles are connected with the third ventricle with the help of a pathway. This is the channel or pathway which connect the third ventricle with the fourth ventricle. I have made this pathway in the green color. This green color pathway which connect the right ventricle with the third ventricle and the left ventricle with the third ventricle. Pathway are these foramen, are these holes, are these channels are called foramen of Monro. Foramen of Monro. Foramen of Monro are the foramen which connect the lateral ventricle with the third ventricle. The foramen of Monro. There are two foramen of Monro. This foramen of Monro and this foramen of Monro. These foramen of Monro connect the right and left ventricle of the brain with the third ventricle. This is the third ventricle. Now the third ventricle is connected with the fourth ventricle with the help of ductus salvius. This is also called cerebral aqueduct or ductus salvius. Ductus salvius, or you can also call it cerebral aqueduct. This is called cerebral aqueduct or ductus salvius. So the ductus salvius or cerebral aqueduct connect. This is also a channel in between the third ventricle and fourth ventricle. These connect the two ventricles. Now the fourth ventricle goes through the spinal cord. Where the third ventricle is located, this is located near the thalamus and hypothalamus, or below the thalamus, and this is located below. This is located dorsally to the brain stem. This is located dorsally to the brain stem, or behind the brain stem, in between the cerebellum and the brain stem. This is located in between the cerebellum and the brain stem. But this portion of the fourth ventricle exists in the brain stem, and the dorsal part of the brain stem, this fourth ventricle exists, and below the brain stem, the channel which goes through the spinal cord, this is called central canal. This is called central canal. The central canal goes through the spinal cord. The central canal. The central canal goes through the spinal cord, and this is also for the this is also for what? This is also for the flow of cerebrospinal fluid. Normally, the cerebrospinal fluid formation occur in four ventricles. In this ventricle, this lateral ventricle, this third ventricle, and this fourth ventricle. fourth ventricle. From these two ventricles, the cerebrospinal fluid goes to the third ventricle. From the third ventricle, it goes to the fourth ventricle, and from fourth ventricle, it goes to the central canal, and also uh, towards the um, towards the meninges, a subarachnoid space over there. I'm going to uh, tell in detail. In this lecture, in this slide, we can see over here that the formation of the cerebrospinal fluid occur in this ventricle, in this ventricle, in this ventricle, and also in the fourth ventricle. When the formation of the cerebrospinal fluid occur in these ventricles, what will happen? This cerebrospinal fluid will flow from these ventricle to third ventricle, from third ventricle to the fourth ventricle. From the fourth ventricle, it will goes to the central canal. This is the central canal, and from the fourth ventricle, it will also move to the subarachnoid space over here. It will move towards subarachnoid space, because the cerebrospinal fluid is also required all around the brain and spinal cord. So to move all around the brain and spinal cord, it should be transferred from the fourth ventricle to the subarachnoid space. How it is transferred to subarachnoid space? There are three holes in the fourth ventricle. In the fourth ventricle, three holes are there: two lateral foramen and one central foramen. So the lateral foramen are called foramen Leschka. These two are called foramen Leschka, and these are called this is called foramen Meninges. I'm going to write the name: foramen Leschka and foramen Meninges. So the foramen Meninges is the middle one. It's the middle one, the middle hole or the middle channel, which goes from the fourth ventricle to the cerebrospinal fluid in the subarachnoid space, from the fourth ventricle to subarachnoid space, and these goes laterally to the subarachnoid space. This goes dorsally to the subarachnoid space. This goes dorsally to the subarachnoid space, and these goes laterally to the subarachnoid space. These are the lateral foramen, and this is the central foramen. This is called foramen Meninges, and these two are called foramen Leschka. In this diagram, we can see that the cerebrospinal fluid is transferred from the fourth ventricle to the subarachnoid space. These lateral foramen transfer the cerebrospinal fluid from the fourth ventricle to the subarachnoid space over here laterally. This goes laterally, while this one, the central which is called foramen Meninges, the foramen Meninges transfer the cerebrospinal fluid from the fourth ventricle to the also to the subarachnoid space, but it goes dorsally. It goes behind. It goes backward direction. It goes dorsally to the subarachnoid space, and these goes laterally. Now over here in this diagram, we can see that where the cerebrospinal fluid formation occur. Cerebrospinal fluid formation occur in these. You can see these are the cluster of the capillaries. The capillaries cluster are the bunch of capillaries. The cerebrospinal fluid formation occur in these bunch of capillaries. These bunch of capillaries are there in the third ventricle, in the fourth ventricle, in the lateral ventricle. All of the four ventricle contain the bunch of capillaries, and these bunch of capillaries are called what? So the bunch of capillaries which are all around there in the four ventricle are called choroid plexus. So the formation of the cerebrospinal fluid occur by the choroid plexus. I'm going to write the name: plexus. So the choroid plexus is actually the bunch of capillaries. This represents the choroid plexus represent the bunch of capillaries which is surrounded by the ependymal cells. The bunch of capillaries, these are the bunch of capillaries you can see surrounded by the ependymal cells. The ependymal cells surround the bunch of capillaries, and this bunch of capillaries is called choroid plexus. The formation of the cerebrospinal fluid occur in this bunch of capillaries. The composition of the cerebrospinal fluid and plasma are just like same, but the plasma contain large amount of the protein content, but the cerebrospinal fluid contain less quantity of the protein content and some portion of white blood cells also. The cerebrospinal fluid contain very low amount of protein, but contains some white blood cells also, and these are filtered or here the plasma filtration of the CSF filtration occurs in this area through the bunch of capillaries into the ventricle. Through the bunch of the capillaries into the ventricle, the leakage of the cerebrospinal fluid occur into these ventricle. The leakage of the cerebrospinal fluid occur in these ventricle, and daily and on daily basis, roughly up to 500 ml of uh, up to 500 ml of what? Up to 500 ml of CSF formation occur in these choroid plexus. In these choroid plexus, up to 500 ml of the cerebrospinal fluid occur, and these goes to these ventricle. From these ventricle, these goes to the subarachnoid space, and from the subarachnoid space, this goes all around the brain and spinal cord, but it also goes over here in this area. This is very important area for the cerebrospinal fluid. The formation of cerebrospinal fluid actually occur in the choroid plexus and these four ventricles, which are surrounded by ependymal cell, and ependymal cells are having very tight junction. It only allow the cerebrospinal fluid to cross. So what will happen? The formation occur in these ventricle. After the formation, these will go from these two ventricle to third ventricle. From the third ventricle, it will go to fourth ventricle, and from fourth ventricle, it will go to the subarachnoid space. From the subarachnoid space, it will go all around the brain and spinal cord, below and all around the brain and spinal cord, and it will also goes to this area. This is the longitudinal fissure of the brain. Inside the longitudinal fissure of the brain, the dura mater is protruded to this area. The dura mater is protruded to this area. And that area are that meninges, the meningeal layer, which are protruded into the longitudinal fissure, that is called falx cerebri. That is called what? Falx, falx cerebri. So the falx cerebri are actually the meningeal layer, the protrusion of the meningeal layer into the longitudinal fissure. The protrusion are the extension of the meningeal layer into the longitudinal fissure. That is called falx cerebri. Inside this falx cerebri, what happened? Inside this falx cerebri, the absorption of the CSF occur, because as I have told you that on daily basis 500 ml of CSF formation occur, but where it goes, because the whole ventricle and the subarachnoid space can accommodate the cerebrospinal fluid up to 200 ml, not more than 200 ml on average base. This is 150 ml. 150 ml of the cerebrospinal fluid exists in all the cavities and all around the brain and spinal cord. So where does the remaining CSF go? The remaining CSF goes and absorb over here. Absorb in this superior sagittal sinus. Over here you can see that this is the pia mater. The pia mater is extended to the to the longitudinal fissure of the brain. After the 5 meter, the subarachnoid, the arachnoid matter is also extended to the longitudinal fissure. This red color represent this the arachnoid matter, and the dura matter is also extended to the. You can see over here that dura matter is also extended, which is represented by the green color. So all the meningeal layer are extended to the longitudinal fissure. But over here, in between these two half, in between these meninges, in between the dura matter, you can see over here the red color. This is called superior sagittal sinus. This is called superior sagittal sinus. This superior sagittal sinus is for venous drainage, for the drainage of blood to the venous system. This is just a sinus of the vein. This is called superior sagittal sinus. This is very important one. I'm going to write it. Superior sagittal sinus. This is for venous return. This is for venous return. This is superior sagittal sinus, and to the superior sagittal sinus, the portion of the arachnoid matter is extended, is protruded. This protrusion of the portion of the arachnoid matter into the this this superior sagittal sinus. This is actually protruded firstly to the dura mater. This is protruded to dura mater and then to the venous sinus. This is sagittal sinus, superior sagittal sinus. This is actually venous sinus. So this protrusion is of the arachnoid matter is called. Two types of protrusion are there. This is called arachnoid villi. This is called arachnoid villi, and this is the group of villi. This is called arachnoid granulation. So the arachnoid villi and arachnoid granulation, I'm going to write arachnoid villi and arachnoid granulation. Granulation is the group of villi are protruded to the dura mater and then to the venous sinus and into the superior sagittal sinus. So the absorption of the cerebrospinal fluid, over here there is cerebrospinal fluid, because this is this area, this represents this area. This is the longitudinal fissure area, and this area is now magnified. In this area we can see this is the 5 meter, this is arachnoid matter, and this is the dura matter. This green color represents the dura matter. So the arachnoid matter is extended to the dura matter and then to the to what, to the superior sagittal sinus, and to the superior sagittal sinus, this protrusion are called villi and granulation. So the cerebrospinal fluid is also extended over here. The cerebrospinal fluid can also flow to this area, and when the cerebrospinal fluid flow to these protrusions, what will happen? These will cross this cerebrospinal fluid will cross this portion and will be absorbed to the venous return, will be absorbed to the superior sagittal sinus. So the absorption of the cerebrospinal fluid mainly occur in the superior sagittal sinus. This can also be absorbed in the various veins and various lymphatic system also, but the majority of the cerebrospinal fluid is absorbed in the superior sagittal sinus over here into the superior sagittal sinus. Now once again we are going to discuss it. So the formation of the cerebrospinal fluid occur in the choroid plexus, and these choroid plexuses, four choroid plexus occur in over there. A daily basis 500 ml of the cerebrospinal fluid occur in these choroid plexus, and these are transferred into the ventricle. From the ventricle it goes to the third ventricle and the fourth ventricle. From the fourth ventricle it goes to the subarachnoid space, and from the subarachnoid space it goes to the to this area. It goes to this. What is this area? This is the dural sac, to the dural sac and also to the central canal, and it also goes to this area. This is very important area, It also goes to this area. While going to this area, to the falx cerebri, the cerebrospinal fluid is absorbed into the venous return. The cerebrospinal fluid is absorbed into the superior sagittal sinus. So the formation of the cerebrospinal fluid occur in the choroid plexus through the active transport. This is transported to the ventricle. From the lateral ventricle it goes to this is now the flow of the cerebrospinal fluid. This is the flow occurs from the lateral ventricle to the third ventricle through the foramen of Monroe. From the third ventricle it goes to the fourth ventricle to the cerebral aqueduct. From the fourth ventricle it goes through foramen Leska and the foramen Meninges to the to where to the subarachnoid space. From the subarachnoid space it goes and absorb into the superior sagittal sinus. So the absorption occurs in superior sagittal sinus.